Recently I read Stephen King's Insomnia and it's so awesome and I need to talk to someone about it. So here we are, I'm going to talk about it. First on the agenda, this book is about a 70-plus-year-old man called Ralph Roberts developing early rise insomnia after his wife dies, and as a result of the sleep deprivation he begins to hallucinate. At least he thinks that's what's happening, until someone else from his town and a very close friend of his is like, "Yo bro, I'm seeing it too." And they kind of join forces and they follow the little breadcrumbs left to them in this heightened reality. Bada bing, bada boom, they save the world, in an essence of it, without giving too much away. I know a lot of people hesitate when picking up a Stephen King book because they're thick as fuck. This book is 650 pages long and it's bigger than my head. The writing is relatively small, so there's a lot of words, but regardless of that, nothing is in this book that shouldn't be. Every word progresses the plot further. Every chapter contains its own drama, its own entertainment that actively work together to bring you towards the climax. Starting with the writing style, the hallucinations in particular were told very realistically. This is told in third person. I think most of his books are told in third person, but we do follow the character called Ralph and we're privy to his inner monologue, and Stephen effortlessly portrayed in the most entertaining way possible how Ralph kind of worked through the mentality of possibly going insane from seeing things that weren't actually there. It lets you use your imagination. He doesn't spend 10 pages pedantically explaining to you the town's entire infrastructure and its history. He'll give you a tidbit here, a tidbit there, chuck in a sentence there, maybe a bit of a paragraph over here. He will just tell you it's a supermarket and boom. It's a fucking supermarket, what else do you need? Use your imagination. It makes you remember it more because you create the world that they're in. You get told there are certain things here and there, but otherwise you create the world. You've created a whole new world and this book and the events of it exist in it, which is awesome. Another thing that he does is that he explores his characters. You get to learn about their childhood, you get to learn about their family, about their deepest fears, about their mundane everyday thoughts. Stephen King is always entertaining, his writing is always so immersive that you don't get bored of it. You don't get bored of learning about these characters, because the more you learn about the characters, you realize that they weren't just random characters that he made up willy-nilly and started writing a story about. These are characters where their story is attached to the overall story. They were meant to be in the story. They were meant to come to this moment in time and create this story, which is awesome because meaning. He's not one to create characters that follow a certain stereotype, and the heroes and the villains in Insomnia are no exceptions. Speaking of which, the heroes, Ralph and Lois, were written really, really well. They were realistic, they were funny, they were entertaining, you could feel sympathy for them when they, came into a hard spot, which is always good for a character, because if you don't feel sympathy, you don't give a fuck. Obviously, realistic as in, their age, they're quite old, so that does come into the story a bit, and as the story evolves, they still develop the normal angst and repute of most everyday heroes written in books. Ralph specifically is really open-minded and accepting as a character. He's incredibly blunt and very, very caring. He does what has to be done because it's the right thing to do, and he's very admirable for that. Lois isn't like super strong and I can beat down the man and stuff like that. She's not that kind of strong, but she is strong-minded and she knows what she loves and she does what she loves, and when she wants something, she gets it. She doesn't get it, she's not spoiled, but she understands herself and who she is, and she understands her limits, and she understands that she can break those limits, and she does it, which is awesome because not only is she old, but she's a woman and she's a strong, well thought through character. She's not a side character, she's not a side plot, she's a character. The villains, as always in a Stephen King novel, are otherworldly. They're not your typical fantasy vampire werewolf villains. No, he creates new forms of supernatural villains, which is scary. What's scarier than the unknown? And it takes a lot of imagination to create a new, spin a new villain that isn't like any other villain. So I like that. Personally, I love this book. It had an originality that I've come to expect from Stephen King because he's my favorite author and I've read quite a few of his books. It contained such realistic brutality and incorporated everyday, whims and dramas really well. The fantastical elements, Stephen's fantastical elements always take me out of this world. He does it so effortlessly and he just intertwines actual reality with his books and stitches them up with his own reality, and I love that. This book does contain mature content. It's Stephen King. He's the king of horror. Point blank and blunt language used in the book. There's no sugarcoating in it, but in saying that, if you're into YA horror and you're looking to, progress in that genre, or if you're just looking for something original, something, out of the norm in adult fiction horror, pick up any Stephen King book. But in all honesty, I can't recommend this book enough. It's so good. I love it so much. Stephen King, okay? Stephen King. That's all I have to say. Oh, I would say at least 20 centimeters tall.